I'm happy to have our very own Dr. Rominger on the line to talk with us about his creative life. Ryan is an assistant professor in the global program at Sofia University, and he focuses on working with people who are integrating exceptional human experiences into their lives. He is also focused on diversity and transpersonal psychology, transformation, working with research methods that honor the expressive arts and social action, and the use of online technology in transpersonal higher education. So, Ryan, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you, Ashana. It's a pleasure to be here.
Is there anything you'd like to add to what I just said?
I've recently been contemplating how a lot of the different various things I do hang together, and one of the things I've come back to is that really my focus is on the integration of exceptional human experiences or peak experiences, and that has to do with everything from how mirror neurons work within when a person shares their experience with other people, and how the mirror neuron system is activated in other people, to what is the definition of integration? What does it mean to integrate something into our life? We have the positive aspects of integration and potential negative aspects. We have pleasant aspects of peak experiences and distressing aspects of those experiences, and all of that kind of wraps up into essentially the integration of exceptional experiences. That's my main focus. Actually, let me just add too that being trained as a spiritual guidance counselor or spiritual director, as well as working in expressive arts, again, those also play into my focus of integrating exceptional experiences.
Yes, I know that in our research class you had set up a study with other students where we all documented exceptional human experiences in story and in art, and then looked at that data to write up a study report.
Yes. Yeah, that was a rather exciting research group that we had going for a couple of years. And in some ways we were looking at how adding the expressive arts component would contribute to the understanding of the EHE, which stands for Exceptional Human Experience, the EHE phenomena, and the integration and the shadow aspects of the EHE phenomena. And that was a pleasure to be able to sink into that study and look at the data that came out of that, and the huge variety of ways that people express their experiences. Wonderful research project of which you were a part, actually.
Yeah, it was a very inspiring project. It gave me a lot of ideas for my own research design, and it opened a window into the research world that I just didn't know that part of the research world existed. It was a very valuable class. How did you discover using the arts in research?
How I discovered it in research probably came after I started doing expressive arts myself. And so the story probably begins quite a ways before that time, when like yourself, I was doing expressive arts without calling it expressive arts as a child. I was into poetry and really had an orientation towards the world of appreciating the texture and the fabric of the world around me in a variety of ways. I like to draw. I would, like to secretly dance to music when nobody was around, that type of thing when I was a kid. And that statement alone has a couple of different implications. One, that I like to dance, but two, it had to be in secret because of, the social cultural pressures of being a young boy. particularly in Middle America, conservative Middle America, where it would seem to be looked down upon to do that kind of expression. So, but growing up, I really, that was a part of me. My grandmother was a potter and an avid craftswoman, weaver, a lot of sewing, and I was involved with that. She taught me how to work with clay and really get dirty and make pots. Loved that process. Making stained glass windows. I mean, all sorts of things, and also make really odd things that you would never consider.
Like what?
She was a bit of an odd duck. She liked to collect dead animals for different things and get the claws off of owls. And so at one point she got all the feet off of chickens when they were harvesting the chickens that year, killing the chickens, and she collected them. And as chicken feet dry, they curl up. So you essentially have a chicken foot that's curled, kind of like, almost looks like a J, with the claws, curled. And so she took those and she tacked them onto a 2x4 that was about, a foot and a half, 2 feet long, and she made a hat rack by putting all these chicken feet curled upwards in the hook. So, I had stuff like that around me that was just kind of bizarre. And moving back to the farm here has been a real experience, because we moved back into her house and we found some of these things around that now as an adult I look back and I think, why would you have a dried cat carcass, here? It's just some of those bizarre types of things that were, as a child, were kind of interesting to grow up around. But having that orientation, I think, led me to it really wasn't until graduate school that I got into formal expressive arts. In undergraduate, I took a few classes like clay work and stuff like that, but I never really took a lot of art classes. But in my first year at what was then ITP, because I was a graduate of ITP in 2004, it introduced me to using expressive arts as a modality for opening up the subconscious and the unconscious, and looking at how those things flow through our lives. And how different archetypal imagery comes out in different periods of our life. So from there, I started using expressive arts, and then later got into the research part of it, because my own dissertation incorporated expressive arts. In order to get the certificate in expressive arts, you had to incorporate some aspect of expressive arts into your dissertation, just as you were doing as well.
Yeah. So
I think that was really where I learned about expressive arts in research, and that was late 90s, early 2000s.
And I'm curious, were you influenced by any particular writers in the field?
The two large influences for me in person were Dr. Jill Mellick, who was the founder of the Expressive Arts program at ITP, now Sofia University, and Natalie Rogers, who is Carl Rogers' daughter, and she's the author of The Creative Connection, the book The Creative Connection, which I use in my Expressive Arts class and other people use as well. And I had experience with both of those as teachers throughout the process. Authors, Sean McNiff was starting to write about then. A man by the last name of Moon. I remember reading his work. It was more archetypal, Jungian type stuff. That was influential. Jung's work, obviously, with archetypal work, stuff that came through his writing. Those were a lot of the big ones. I think another thing that really has influenced my work has been my teaching in group projective dream work with Jeremy Taylor.
Oh,
and
what's that?
It's a form of dream work that you do in a group setting. It's Jungian or neo-Jungian in perspective, but it also is essentially he's a Unitarian Universalist minister who is also an academic, and he's been teaching at ITP, now Sofia, for many years. And the influence in particular is one of the things that we say in that group dream work is somebody shares a dream, and then we all work it together. And we often say, well, if this were my dream, because it is now my imagined dream, I've just heard it from someone.
Oh, yes.
If this were my dream, this is how I would, this is what I think of if this were my dream. And so when working with expressive arts, I use that. If this were my piece, here's what I see. If this were my piece, this is what I imagine doing that movement would feel like, or making that sound, or writing that poem. This is what I imagine it internally, subjectively, to be like. And so it allows for an acknowledgement of my own projections onto this piece, which somebody else made and created. But it also acknowledges my subjective reality that is going on for me, my own internal reactions as I experience that.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to say what that piece means. More, I'm trying to claim my own subjective reality as I engage that other person's projection into the world. So that was another big influence for me. And when I combined expressive arts and spiritual guidance into what I call creative spiritual expression, that became a very vital component for me when doing expressive arts work.
And just the dream work as the method, or did you use other methods to access a similar awareness?
Awareness of the projections?
Yes, yeah.
Well, there's all different methods. I've led seminars on using expressive arts with dream work. In fact, integrating Jeremy Taylor's style of dream work with expressive arts. So having do expressive arts together, and then not only just sharing the if it were my dream piece to the dream work, but also sharing our imagery that we draw or the expressive arts that we create, and to put even to put that in the center of the room and have everybody walk around it and look at all the different images that people made, because different parts of the dream will pop for different people, and people's drawings will be different, but they're essentially all drawing the same dream. And so the dreamer, in particular, who shared the initial dream, as that person walks around, will get a new sense of aha as they're looking at that expressive artwork that the whole group has drawn. But anyway, there's lots of different modalities of working with expressive arts. Dream work is just one of them.
That seems to translate well to any kind of research that involves participatory knowing, because in a sense the researcher is looking at a topic through the expression, the variable expression of all the participants.
Yes.
And then formulating, or taking from that a new impression of the topic.
Right, based on their own subjective reactions to those projections, those expressive art pieces. Yeah.
Yes. Powerful.
Absolutely.
What about when it's time to express that understanding that you have about something, rather than opening up your understanding to other perspectives and allowing for kind of a subjective transformation, of your own understanding, or even just some rather than being in response to other people's understanding. Do you have a preferred method for surfacing yours in the moment?
Surfacing my projections, my awareness?
Yeah. What your impression is of something, or your experiences of something in the moment. Do you have a preferred method for that?
When I am sitting with somebody else's expressive artwork, and then I assume that's what you're talking about, when somebody shares an expression and I'm sitting with it. I go back to the body. I like to feel what's going on inside of me. I go back to my emotions, and I think this is where different awareness practices become very handy. Mindfulness-based practices, being able to be aware of what's going on internally for oneself, and I believe that helps us understand and get a sense of our own projections outwardly. And so being able to feel, wow, I feel like I have a rock in my stomach. What's that about? And then sitting with that as I continue to look at somebody's piece and saying, that darkness in the middle of the page there, somehow it's connected to that. And then from there, letting the awareness come up. Or seeing a really bright, vibrant piece and saying, I feel my heart fluttering. I feel something fluttering in the middle of my chest. What's that about? And opening to that question and opening to that process of unfoldment and paying attention to how that unfolds into a conscious awareness of what the connection is between my subjective experience is and the experience of the piece that I'm seeing or hearing or feeling. I also think that compassion exercises are very important, profoundly important. Compassion for ourselves and for others, because practicing compassion exercises allows us to be okay with the reaction that we do have. It allows us to be compassionate towards ourselves if we get angry or we feel frustrated or we feel averse or drawn towards or whatever the movement may be, and having compassion towards the other person as they're expressing something that might be difficult for them. So I think compassion exercises are, for me, a piece as well. Appreciation of the broad variety of ways that we can express ourselves. Appreciation of difference, in other words. But also appreciation of those things that we have in common, or that we might have in common.
Yes. Right, so it's a compassion to reduce inhibition and appreciation to open up the possibilities.
Right.
Yeah. And now, what about when it's just you and yourself? And what do you do personally, creatively? What's your creative life like in private?
Well, again, I started with poetry early on. Occasionally, I'll still have a poem or two come to me, but I've moved into my dominant mode of expression is oil and chalk pastel on paper. Now, I say that kind of it's not entirely true, because I did do a lot of sketching. When I do journal work, when I'm journaling dreams or whatever, I'll sketch with a pen or something like that. So if you're talking about number-wise, I probably do more sketches than I do expressive arts with oil and chalk pastel. But when I sit down to quote-unquote do expressive arts, often I'll be starting with oil or chalk pastel on paper. Now, because I've become comfortable with that and that's become my primary modality of work, I'm also consciously trying to go outside of that in order to keep my expressive arts alive. I think that for me, I'm going to claim this, but I've also read it as well, and numerous expressive arts authors have said this. When you become skilled at using one particular medium, sometimes it becomes easy to block certain energies from coming forward because we get used to it. We get skilled at that and start thinking about how this line looks or how that goes with that, or am I doing this exactly how I want? So just like sometimes we need to flip into using our non-dominant hand, I think we also need to flip into using non-dominant medium, using clay or using movement, something that pushes my boundaries in order to show me something new that isn't refined through my lenses that I've created because I've been doing oil and chalk pastels, primarily.
That reminds me of the whole difference between engaging the witness and engaging the critic.
Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So that said, I've this past 6 months in particular moved into a medium that I haven't ever done before, which has actually been quite fun. A number of months ago, I had an image come to me that was extremely pressing, extremely strong. And it was one of those images that just would not let go. And I found it taking up a lot of my mental space and energy. And I kept having this internal sense of, I got to do this. I need to make this. That pressure from within, that psychical pressure from within. And it got to the point where I decided I needed to do something about it, but I didn't have the time to actually engage in the full project. And so I turned to the oil and chalk pastels and drawing in order to make a picture of what it was that I wanted to do, which was a red door out in the middle of a field. And the actual project was literally taking a house door and painting it really well, so multiple coats of paint over primer and painting it as if it was, being put onto a house, and getting it up in the field out here on the farm. And so we're talking, mixed media, so to speak.
Yes.
And so a couple months ago, I actually started to be able to find the time, and I pulled out an old door from one of the buildings around here that actually used to be a door on the house I grew up in, but had since been taken down and replaced, and cleaned it up and painted it bright red, and ended up cutting metal fence posts to create a frame around it and spray painting those gold, and having the ends of the fence posts go down further than the door so that I could actually stick it into the ground out in the middle of a field. And I now have that piece up here on the farm, and the second part of that process is actually taking pictures of that door every week throughout a whole calendar year. So I've started taking pictures of the door with the various backgrounds and the tall grass around it and the snow, because we have snow. Well, we did have snow right now. Most of it's melted off. But so I'm going to be watching the door and how it evolves for a calendar year on the farm. And I am through this process, I've really found that a number of things have happened, but one of the things that's happened is as I have engaged in doing this and opening up to letting this image come through, my dream life has become much more vivid. I've started remembering dreams again. The imagery in the dreams has become more meaningful or profound or more vivid, more archetypal. I've started drawing some of those again. And I've also had a few experiences where when I was working on the door, I was actually standing on the bed of a grain truck, so high off the ground, looking down at the door that I was working on. And I remember distinctly at one point, and I knew I was in an altered state at this point, because I remember looking up, and I started seeing everything in the shop around me that I could paint. It's like, oh, I see a door that I could paint there, and I could do this. And after, as I finished up and I walked outside I saw all sorts of different things that it's almost as if they were painted. I could look at something and I saw, oh, there's the image that would be painted on that, and oh, there's the image over there. It was very dynamic and quite wonderful. A wonderful space to be in.
It does sound. That sounds like an altered state of consciousness.
Oh, it very much was. Very much was. And I think opening to this imagery has allowed not only those altered states to come back into play, which it's hard to get time to do that type of work, but it's allowed that, I think, that unconscious material to start flowing through that much more in my life.
So if you do a little bit of it, that you still get the effect through your life, through the other aspects of your life.
Yeah, and it starts opening up. So I'd say last year I wasn't engaged in that process, and I wasn't actively doing a lot of expressive artwork, and I didn't have the same relationship to that rich archetypal imagery that I did once I started opening up to this particular image and really engaging in that expressive arts practice. So yeah, by opening up a little bit, I think you end up opening the floodgate, so to speak. You open up to more of it, allowing it to come through.
Yeah, and that actually is a great segue to a question I've been wanting to ask you about the pros and the cons. You mentioned earlier when you work with people about integrating exceptional human experiences into their lives, both the advantages and disadvantages come into play. And so I'm curious for you if the creative process has had any disadvantages in your life, or if there are any cautions you might have to offer.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, it can be cost prohibitive, depending on what medium you choose.
Old doors, if there aren't any old doors lying around.
Right, exactly. Another. So I'm thinking of a couple of different things. There's the logistical piece that can be difficult. Finding a spot in your house to devote to this type of work. Kind of creating that safe spot to do the work, setting it aside, having the materials to engage in this type of work. But on the other side, I wouldn't say it's a drawback. I would say that it's one of the things that makes people nervous, is once they start opening up, it becomes important to have that safe container and a very strong container, a support system around you if things like anger or like trauma come forward that you work with. So that's where I think, in our class, I really try and put a lot of emphasis, and particularly in week 1, on creating that safe container to do this work. Because we want to be able to let that come forward, but what we don't want is for it to shatter your life. That's not the point. The point is to be able to learn to work with it and open up to the transformational aspects of it, and allow that transformation to happen without slingshotting you into depression or making you spin out. Yeah. But admittedly, that doesn't happen very often. There are a lot of, I think, internal mechanisms that make us aware of our boundaries. Whether it's the inner critic or, for example, I had in my dissertation project, actually, I had a participant who had a near-death experience, and we were using multimodal work, doing expressive artwork, and then talking about the experience, and then writing about it. And it became too much for her because she was accessing memories that she hadn't fully processed. Mm-hmm. And she started to shut down, and that was her way of saying, okay, mentally she'd had enough. She couldn't handle it anymore. And so she started diverting herself and ended up withdrawing from the project because of her need to not open that up.
Right.
So we have the ability to listen to our own intuition of not doing it too quickly or too much. And as Natalie Rogers says, there's also an absolute imperative within humanistic psychology of trusting the process and trusting one's own natural healing abilities that will come forward. And I really believe that. So.
Yeah, I do too. And the fact that there are so many creative modalities to draw upon, we can find great comfort in some of them to kind of calm our system. And there are those we can use to open up the system and delve deeper, and there are those we can use to calm our system as well.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
Well, that's very, very important to consider going into this class, and I'm really looking forward to everything we have to learn together and to discover really about ourselves during the class. What are you looking forward to about the class?
Well, there's a number of things. One is I always love seeing how people open up from between week 1 and week 9. It's normal for people to be hesitant in the beginning and to have thoughts of, oh, I can't do this, or I'm not a creative person, or there's 101 things that along those lines people can think. And then over the weeks, people tend to become more comfortable. They realize, oh yes, I can do this, and they encounter those barriers, those blockages. They work with them. They allow them, they get through them, and then by week 9, you're looking back and saying, wow, I did that. I engaged in this work. The other thing that I always enjoy is seeing how the group comes together as a group, and some of the imagery that comes through that might be synchronous, as you were mentioning before at one point. There are kind of group movements that sometimes happen, depending on the group. And that's always fun to see as well. But mostly my goal in the expressive arts class is really to introduce people to the expressive arts and the different media that we can use, and to get people thinking about how they might be able to use this in their life, whether it's their own personal work or using it with clients if they're already a therapist, or using it in workshops. There's lots of different ways in research, or integrating it into collecting data or processing your data, or
maybe creating a completely new way to use creativity.
Exactly. Yep. That's right.
Well, this has just been marvelous talking with you, Ryan. I've learned a great deal about you, and I really appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to doing the class with you.
Yes, you're very welcome, and thank you for taking the time to interview me. And it was a pleasure to be able to share a bit about myself. Thank you.
So be well, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Okay, bye.